Welcome back to the Hospitalist Training Video Series. In this video, I'd like to demonstrate how to perform a medication reconciliation. Well, there's several places to find the medication reconciliation module. The first is in the medications workflow. Within the workflow page, you'll see the check marks, and you'll see that in this case, the patient has had a medication history and they've also had an admission med rec. If they had not had one, they'll look like, let's find the discharge. It would look like this. It would have a blue exclamation mark in front of it. But for demonstration purposes, I'll go back to the workflow and back here. The med history is typically performed by either a med rec nurse from pharmacy or an RN nurse taking care of the patient on the floor, or sometimes also a nurse in the ED may do one. Let me just show you what they see when they're performing a meds history, as they call it. When you click on this module, it gives you the option to add manually any medication you'd like. So I can click there and say if the patient was not on, let's say they were on metformin, I can type it in. And you'll see these number of tabs afterwards. You're not actually prescribing a specific number of tablets, but that actually pre-populates the field, so then if you give the patient a prescription when they're being discharged, it will automatically pre-populate whatever number you pick here. So it just speeds up the process of discharge. So feel free to pick one that has tablets available, and I'll pick this number 60 since I would doubt I would want to prescribe more than a month of metformin at discharge if I were the hospitalist. So I can add a medication myself if I'd like to do that. If I see that one was left off or one was made in error, I can go back and look at some of these others and do the same thing. Notice here there's this module for external RX history. I can either view it or import it. And typically it will give me a window that says I need to have consent granted, and you can confidently click that button. And then in this area it will actually give you a list of the medications the patient is taking. So if I did add a medication to the meds history panel, I can click on this document history to make sure they're added. And now the meds history has been updated, and I can now go to the admission med rec and complete it. And it lists the home medicines here. That's a script. This patient has been demonstrated several times, so there's some prescriptions that have actually been given to this patient, actually printed off or e-prescribed. But all you do is click what you want to continue in the hospital. If I wanted to continue the apixaban, if I wanted to continue this 32 unit 70/30 with supper, hopefully I would not though, because we usually prefer to split those up into a basal bolus. So the lisinopril we want to continue. Say we want to hold the metformin since this patient is probably getting a contrast study. Hold their morphine, multivitamin, and probably continue their depression medicines. And you see that that exclamation mark. If we were to click on this, it actually gives you the option to review the schedule, so you can actually change the timing of the patient's medications. This is the same as you would find in the order entry window as well. So keep in mind, Cerner gives you a lot of control over when the patient gets their dosing. Otherwise, the pharmacy uses something called the 50-50 rule to determine whether to give the patient the medications today or wait until tomorrow, depending on what time of day they come in. So it's a good habit to get into if you see that exclamation mark, to go into that prescription and make sure the patient's getting the medications when you want to give them. It could be that this patient had already taken their lisinopril at home, was admitted in the afternoon, and before, maybe just 2 or 3 hours later, well, if pharmacy does not have a history that the patient took lisinopril, they may assume that based on the 50-50 rule, they're going to give them another dose of lisinopril today. Now your patient has developed syncope as a result of having doubling up on blood pressure medication inadvertently. So using this feature of Cerner, using this review schedule, is a powerful feature to avoid medication errors. So once everything is chosen, and if you're not sure if there's a lot of medications, you can always hover over here where it says 0 missing required details. Clicking on that will take you to the next medication that needs reconciling. And then you say sign. Notice plan. Plan as if you're not ready to make these in active order. If they're, for whatever reason, if they're coming in and they're not here yet, and you don't want them to be initiated till the patient gets to where they're supposed to be on the floor, you may end up planning it. But a lot of times you're going to be doing this, seeing the patient in consultation on the floor, or after the patient's been admitted and has gotten to their bed, or they got admitted the night before, you're picking them up the next day. You can just go ahead and sign these, and they immediately become active orders at that point. Okay, and now we've got a check mark here. You'll also see an option for a transfer med rec. The transfer med rec is extremely important when the patient is being transferred from the ICU back to the floor because it doesn't just use the medications, it actually presents all of the orders the patient is on. Cerner assumes that every order that they're getting will continue once they've moved to another level of care, but this allows you to see not just the medications as they're presented here at the top, but also all the other standard orders, including lab, patient care orders, and most importantly, continuous infusions. We'll cancel this though. And what you'll see is that the transfer medrec and the discharge medrecs are very similar in structure to the admission medrec. One thing I will show you though, as we're doing the medrec, I'm going to click over here to my discharge workflow. I'm on my medication reconciliation here. I'm going to click discharge, and let's say I want to do a prescription on a medication I'm providing. Well, first, let's show you an easy tip to do a discharge medrec. First, we can continue remaining home meds, and that just automatically selects all home meds to continue, and then do not continue remaining orders. So that's usually going to get your medications that were prescribed in the hospital. The system is smart enough to group medications together. So since this patient was continued on Eliquis in the hospital, here's their home med, here's their hospital med. They were continued on lisinopril, here's their home med, here's their hospital med. It groups them together. But up here were medicines we decided not to continue when they were in the hospital. And now I'm assuming we're going to continue those once the patient leaves. But let's say I don't really want them taking bupropion. Let's say they had a seizure or something. I can stop that. And let's say they say, I need a refill of metformin. I ran out, doc. You can click this window right here, which then turns it to a prescription. I can click here. And remember earlier, the 60 tabs? Well, there it is. It's filled in automatically. Another option is I can click one of these to do a 30-day or a 90-day. Give refills if I want. And it defaults to the patient's pharmacy that's already programmed. So here in this case, the patient's already set for a Walmart pharmacy to ePrescribe. Now, if for whatever reason I want to print that instead, I can click here, say printer, and I've already have RX printer set as favorites. So this is 2 south, 3 east, 4 north. But if I want more, I can go to other output devices, go to St. Dominic's Health Services, rather hidden down here. and then finally St. Dominic's Hospital. And now I can just click on any of these areas to find an RX printer and then add that as one of my favorites. So see this one here, I can right click it here and say add to favorites. And there it is. Begins with an RX printer 5 East. I can go back here and keep adding them until I've got every one of them I need. There's another RX printer. And so if I choose instead to do an RX printer here, I can say OK, and it switches here to RX. Now the next prescription I'm going to do, so they need to refill, well, we do have their lens up there, Zyprexa. If I click here, that's already been prescribed, so let's say they're lisinopril. It would typically assume, one thing I made a mistake, and let's see here. Let me repeat that process. So lisinopril, I click here on the prescription bottle, click here to bring up the working window, and I can click here. So there, it automatically goes to the RX printer. It defaults to that. But I can go back to the ePrescription if I wanted to. And if this were a narcotic prescription, I would have to use the RX printer for now. The other thing that happens with the narcotic prescriptions is it will default to acute therapy and require a stop date. So all you have to do to solve that problem is just go over here and click maintenance on a narcotic prescription, and it will take away that requirement to use a start and stop date. And then once you sign, it automatically sends these prescriptions to the RX printers. If you're wondering which printers are the RX printers on your floor, you look for the printer that has a lock and key. It looks like the old Coke machine locks. They'll be over the tray because this paper has street value. Unfortunately, we live in those types of that day and time where these things are being sold. So we have the paper under lock and key. So I would sign it, and I would conclude this. Or I can plan it. I can actually plan it. If I plan it for a later date, then it doesn't become active. It puts a check mark and a question mark, and then either a nurse can then initiate it, or another partner who's covering for you over the weekend can then sign it, if that's the case. Okay, so that's medication reconciliation.